Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Education USA presentation on becoming a U.S. student athlete. Thank you so much for joining us today. We do have a chat feature enabled, so do feel free in the chat to say hello. We also have a Q&A area. I highly recommend if you have questions throughout, including them in the Q&A area to be answered at the end of the session. I'll be using polls and handouts throughout. So let's go ahead and get started on the poll. I'm going to ask you what grade you're in. So just to get a sense of what grade students are in who are with us today. And if you are a parent, of course, answer on behalf of your student athlete um, who, who you are listening in for. While you're doing that, let me tell you a little bit about Education USA. Education USA is funded by the US State Department, and we help students all over the world with questions about applying to US universities. Education USA in Canada is located in Ottawa, and I am your Education USA advisor. My name's Jenica, and if you use any of this contact information here, it'll go straight to me. Ottawa at Education USA is the .org is the email address, and definitely check out our website. We do have an athlete area where there's a lot of links to the different resources that athletes need along the way. So that's at educationusacanada.ca. If you see a handouts area, there's a little red dot next to it. There's a bunch of resources that will help support the information that we will be going over today. And if you want to ever follow up with me, I'm happy to provide one-on-one advising. If you are in the stage of applying to US universities, I can help with things like essay and overall application review. And for anybody who, when registering, said they wanted to hear more from Education USA, you'll get added to our email updates where you'll learn about different webinars we have and any kind of in-person or virtual fairs and events that we're a part of. So I'm seeing that we have a diverse crowd here, but overwhelmingly we have mostly grade 10 and 11 student athletes, which is awesome. That's absolutely a great demographic to be here today. I love that there's even some grade 9 athletes here. And even if you are a little bit older than that and just getting started, there still might be opportunities for you depending on when it is you want to get started. All right, we're going to jump right into the subject matter. And as we're doing that, I'm going to ask you what sport you play. So please go ahead and include the gender and sport so that we can get a sense of who's here. And then I can tailor my examples a little bit depending on if we've got a lot of athletes in the same sport. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about which post-secondary and athletic scholarship options exist in the United States. These are the conferences and divisions that have athletic scholarships. In the National Collegiate Athletic Association, Divisions 1 and 2 have athletic scholarships. There's another smaller division called the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics. And this is also is an association that has 4-year universities that grant bachelor's degrees. They have, we're going to talk a little bit about that in the upcoming slides. And then if you're looking at two-year colleges are called community colleges or junior colleges and are often referred to shortening for junior colleges, JUCO. So the JUCO division that has scholarships is called the National Junior College Athletic Association. Now, you can play your sport and not receive a scholarship. You can continue to play for the love of the game and for competition, but maybe not as a scholarship athlete. And there are a number of ways to do that. If you are pursuing a bachelor's degree, NCAA Division III is not an athletic scholarship sport, but of course you could receive merit or needs-based scholarships from the university. There's also club sports. So some sports might have club that also are NCAA. So, like hockey, for example, has a really competitive club division called ACHA, and there's usually no scholarships associated with that, but you can still compete wearing your school's, uh, you know, the name of your school and their colors and all of that. And there's some other sports like cycling or badminton, etc., that might have highly competitive collegiate divisions and absolutely no, NCAA sponsored sports. So if that's one of your sports, you can still play at a high level. You just would not get an athletic scholarship. There are community colleges that also are not part of NJCAA, most notably West Coast universities in California and the Northwest have their own collegiate divisions, and those do not have any scholarships associated with them. We're going to start by focusing on the eligibility to play sports in JUCO, NAIA, and NCAA D3. These are all much more straightforward eligibility, and then we will shift our focus to NCAA D1 and D2 and spend the majority of the presentation focusing on those two divisions. For JUCO, all you have to do to be eligible is to graduate your high school. So you need to, when you enroll, have finished high school and have an official, have a transcript that shows you've graduated. And you need to remain an amateur athlete. Amateur means that you are not professional, that you have not been paid to play your sport. And the other things to bear in mind as an athlete at a two-year college, many athletes who go to two-year colleges are considering then transferring out into a university and completing their play their last 2 years at the university level, maybe in D1 or D2. Now, if you entered community college as an academic qualifier, meaning that you met the NCAA academic requirements, which we will go over in a bit, then you could potentially just play 1 year at your community college before transferring out. If you are a non-qualifier, then you would need to finish your 2 years. Now, the NCAA has very specific transfer rules and requirements, and they have guides for all of this on their website. You can find in the handout section the link to the NCAA website. I'll also just go ahead and put ncaa.org here in the chat. Community college is a great way to improve your grades if your grades are low, but it's also a great way to get more looks from D1 or D2 coaches if you didn't get strong recruitment looks before enrolling in post-secondary. I do know that for baseball players from Canada, it's a very popular route to go. You can see there's a baseball player pictured here. And I find that that's the most common route, but I've also worked with basketball players who've gone to community college, and it really just depends on your own circumstance and what makes the most sense for you. Here's a listing of the junior college sports. A couple things to note that are interesting. Women's flag football is available, as is men's and women's wrestling, men's and women's lacrosse as well. Half marathon is unique to junior college athletics. That is not something available at the four-year universities. And you will notice that beach volleyball is only available for women. And ice hockey, although there are some community colleges, particularly in Minnesota, that have ice hockey, it has its own division. It's not part of the NJC. This is, I put JUCO here, but this is specifically NJCAA athletics that are available. NAIA is an association that people are usually a little less familiar with, but it does have 250 colleges and universities that are part of this conference. They have 21 athletic conferences associated with it. There are 83,000 student athletes and more than $1 billion in scholarships. I've been told that NAIA competition level can be pretty similar to a D2 or D3 level in NCAA. So if that's about where you're at and those are the opportunities you're looking into, don't overlook NAIA. Eligibility for NAIA is fairly straightforward. You will need 2 of the following things listed here. over the minimum SAT and ACT scores. So that's over at 860 for SAT and a 16 for ACT. That's a minimum GPA of 2.0 out of 4.0, or graduate in the top half of your class. If you are unable to prove that you are in the top half of your graduating class because maybe your school's unable to provide that sort of paperwork, then it's highly likely you might need to take the SAT or ACT in order to compete in the NAIA. So this is something to bear in mind. Now, while NAIA doesn't have hockey as a sponsored sport, there are a couple of universities that are NAIA schools that have hockey programs. You can see this is a hockey player here, and they actually compete against, I believe they compete against ACHA institutions. Here's the list of the NAIA sports. A couple things to highlight here is that women's flag football is an emerging sport. It's the only four-year university conference that has women's flag football. The cheer and dance are also part of NAIA as sponsored sports. And men's lacrosse is an invitational only sport. I don't know exactly all the ins and outs of what that means, but essentially it means it's not one of their main sports. Potentially, they're not going to have as many teams and options available. And same with women's volleyball. So those are a few things to consider. Also, NAIA in general does not have ice hockey. It also does not have field hockey. When it comes to NCAA Division III and club sports, as I mentioned previously, there's no athletic scholarships. And so the application to the university itself is going to be very critical for not just your admissions to the institution, but also any scholarship consideration. That includes merit or needs-based scholarships. So you'll find in NCAA Division III that the coach recruitment power really varies by institution and by sport. For most D3 schools, coaches won't have a lot of recruitment power, meaning that it's up to you to get into the school, and then when you get in, the coach might say, "Come see me" once you're here, essentially. But I do know some sports like D3 men's hockey can sometimes the coach might have a little more power in that process. Something that's fairly new is that the Division III athletes do need to create a profile in the NCAA Eligibility Center and need to pay $70 to be approved for an amateurism certificate. So they are subject to the amateurism rules and do need to create that account to be reviewed by NCAA. There are no academic minimums that you need to meet like there is in D1 and D2. And again, we'll go over those in a bit. If you need a fee waiver, which means the $70 is not something your family can afford, that is something that you can now request as an international student. The fee itself and the fee waivers are new since last year. When it comes to club sports coaches usually don't have a lot of sway in the process at all. And also they're not usually like most club sports, you can just walk on and enjoy and play, regardless of what level you have. So club sports are a great way for athletes to just keep being active, even if it's not at a super high level. I'm seeing a number of people's sports have come through, and I'm just going to read out some of them so people know what we've got here. We've got baseball, softball, men's and women's volleyball, track and field, both men's and women's basketball, men's lacrosse, women's fencing, men's hockey, men's and women's soccer, football, swimming. We've got a sailor in the group. Okay, women's track and field. So number of volleyball players, lacrosse, hockey, those ones are coming out the biggest. I see competitive dance, a lot of volleyball players, gymnastics, a pole vaulter. I was a pole vaulter as well, so go pole vaulting. Okay, great. Lots of folks giving their sports, golf, tennis, archery. Archery, unfortunately, is not a NCAA or NAIA sport. but the rest of these are at least one or the other. And an equestrian. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the NCAA. What is NCAA? I think it's something that you hear a lot, particularly when it comes to sports, but it's hard. You might not actually know what they are and what they do. So the NCAA is an eligibility center and a clearinghouse. So essentially, they are reviewing athletes for eligibility based on the rules they've created, and then they're clearing athletes based on those rules. They're also a resource and essentially a rules maker. So when you see that the NCAA is having a tournament, like the NCAA March Madness, let's say, they're in charge of creating all the rules and regulations regarding to the tournament, down to the size of the court, the height of the rim, and all the rules that the athletes need to adhere to when playing. So NCAA is writing and regulating all those rules. So they're doing both athletic eligibility and that rules making. So that's really what they are. They are not further facilitating the recruitment process for the athlete. And that when you make a account with NCAA, they're not going to start matchmaking you to coaches and teams. That is something that you as an athlete need to do on your own. They don't, in their athletic profile, they don't have a place for you to upload recruitment videos and a lot of additional materials. Coaches aren't going into the NCAA eligibility area to try to research and recruit athletes. They are only going there once they already are interested in the athlete and they're checking up to make sure they're on track to be eligible. So all of that kind of interest, buzz, and recruitment has to happen prior to the coach coming to the NCAA and seeing if the athlete is going to be a good fit academic, like they're meeting the amateurs and academic requirements. There are 3 divisions. I've already mentioned that in the NCAA. One thing I like about this graphic is it just tells you, a few things that I think people might be shocked about. Division 3 has by far the most athletic programs. And as far as size of schools, Division 1 tends to be larger universities, while Division 3 tends to be smaller schools. Also, just note that these divisions have to do with the amount of athletic funding an institution is giving towards athletic programs. So an institution chooses to be D1 if they are funding the most, putting the most funding into sports and athletics student scholarships. D2, a little bit less, and then D3, of course, the least, because they don't even have athletic scholarships, right? So that's how they're keeping their budget a lot lower. You can see down at the very bottom there that even though athletes don't receive scholarships in D3, 80% of student athletes do receive some sort of merit or needs-based aid from their school. Here are the sports in the NCAA. I know this one's outlined a little bit differently. Here's a few highlights that I'll point out. Bowling is a men's and women's sport in NAIA and NJCAA, but in the NCAA, there's not many men's programs. It's mostly a women's sport. There's women's field hockey. There's men's and women's gymnastics. There's ice hockey. There's rowing, which is mostly a women's sponsored sport. There are a few men's NCAA teams, but as far as it being considered an NCAA sport, it's more the women's side. There's men's and women's rifle, and there's men's and women's water polo. Wrestling is on the men's side, whereas on the women's side, it's considered an emerging sport. There's a number of emerging sports for women in the NCAA. Those include acrobatics and tumbling, equestrian, rugby, stunt, which is kind of a competitive cheerleading that really focuses on the stunting element, triathlon, and wrestling. So on the men's side, sports like triathlon or rugby are also played, but just completely at the club level. So the NCAA might run tournaments for, say, men's rugby, but the likelihood of getting a scholarship for that sport is incredibly low. There's only a couple of teams in the whole US that would give men's rugby scholarships. Just for fun, here's a little bit of information about where Canadians play. The NCAA has data up through 2022, and I'm sure it's no surprise that the top D1 sport for men is hockey. It's a top D1 sport for all Canadians. It's men's hockey, but followed really closely by women's soccer. And if you combine D1 and D2 women's soccer, you can see that women's soccer surpasses men's hockey as the most popular D1, D2 sport. Women's hockey also has over 300 players. Men's lacrosse between D1 and D2 has, I can't do the math that quickly, but somewhere around 330, no, higher, 400 plus players, which is quite a lot. Track and field is big. Men's soccer and football is really climbing. Men's football in D1 is now at 135 athletes, and in D2 at 75. These numbers are really starting to shoot up. The other one that shot up a lot is men's basketball. So that's really on the rise, a huge sport starting to bust through the ranks. I love seeing men's baseball, D1, D2, between those two divisions, more than 200 athletes. So hopefully this is can serve as a little bit of an inspiration, just seeing how many Canadians are playing these sports. And, you know, followed by, you can see some of the other sports there. And like I said, on the NCAA website, you can actually download a spreadsheet and see the number of athletes from every country in every sport, which is really cool. Because D3 is now monitoring amateurism, hopefully we'll start getting numbers for D3 athletes in the coming years, which will also be pretty exciting. I'd really love to see how many D3 athletes we have out there. So now let's dive deeper into those D1, D2 requirements. This is where it can start to get a little more confusing. So here we go. First and foremost, the Eligibility Center, you can get there by going to ncaa.org, but you can also get there directly by going to eligibilitycenter.org. When you do choose to create an account to be reviewed for eligibility, you'll pay $90. There's also that international fee waiver is available for this $90 fee as well if you need it. Once you pay the fee, you will receive an NCAA ID. You'll be reviewed in two areas, amateurism and academics. And there are important resources that are in the handouts area that I highly recommend you download and save in your browser. The College Bound Guide for Student Athletes. All the information I get comes from the College Bound Guide to Student Athletes, a combination of NCAA based resources. So you too can read that cover to cover and really get a good sense of what you're dealing with through the eligibility process. And my other favorite resource is the directory. So through the ncaa.org directory, you can see all of the sports available and which of them have sponsored NCAA programs, which means that there might be scholarships available for student athletes in that sport. We'll get started with amateurism. So essentially, when you are planning to become a student athlete and you've created an account, you'll be reviewed for amateurism. That needs to happen fairly close to when you'd be enrolling. So it needs to be after April 1st of your year of enrollment. So say you're enrolling this fall 2024, then it would need to be after April 1st of this year. If you're looking at 2025, into the future. And so the NCAA is going to review a bunch of different things to ensure that you've remained an amateur athlete. Just because they review something doesn't mean the thing is bad. It just means that they are looking at it to see if you crossed a line into professionalism. So for example, if you have an agreement or benefits with an agent, if you're a men's hockey player and you've signed with a professional or major junior team, if you participated in tryouts with a professional team, if you've received prize money, which is usually more common in golf and tennis, and if you have any involvement with a recruitment service. So as mentioned, like just doing those things are not necessarily not amateur, but there are ways, like for example, receiving prize money, there are limitations of what you can receive, and once you're over that threshold, you'll be considered a professional. So if you are if any of these things are things that you are potentially going to do or are something you're considering, then definitely take a look at the amateurism rules on the NCAA website around your sport to make sure that you are not accidentally becoming professional. Or if you do become professional, just know that you can no longer play NCAA sports. Academic eligibility. You need to take throughout your high school years, grades 9 through 12, 16 core courses. I can tell you, you will definitely take more courses than those 16, but the NCAA is reviewing you for the 16 core courses. And you will need to have a grade point average of at least a 2.3 for Division 1 out of 4.0 and a 2.2 for Division 2 athletes. In the past, before COVID, the SAT or ACT was required to send to the NCAA to participate in sports. This is no longer a requirement. If you take an SAT or ACT, you do not need to send it to NCAA. They don't need that information. You also need to adhere to the eligibility timeline, which I will go over in more detail. All right. This is what the core courses look like. I know there's a lot of information on this slide. Like I mentioned, this is all in the College Bound student athlete guide, so do use that as a reference point as well. So for D1, you will need 4 units of English or first language. So what this means is, first of all, a unit is usually one class, but a unit can differ in every province. In some provinces, there's some classes that are worth, less than a unit. The English requirement, if you go to a French language high school, the first language French can actually meet the English language requirement. In some cases, even French immersion might meet that requirement. So those English requirements, just note, are essentially primary language requirement. And the biggest difference in Division 2 is that you only need a minimum of 3 of those units, and there's a lot more flexibility in where your units fall. Let's go back to D1. So you need 3 units of math. You'll need 2 units of science. You'll need 1 additional unit of English, math, or science, 2 units of social science, and social science is usually history, geography, psychology, anthropology, courses like that. And then you need 4 additional courses, which can include English, math, science, social science, but it can also include second language or in some cases, religion, philosophy. So what you'll need to do is download I realized I didn't include that link in the handout section. I'll get that link for you all. But essentially, you're going to download the document related to your province. Oh, it's also right here in the it's on the slide, but it's not the nicest it's not the nicest URL. It's kind of complicated. So I will type that out into the chat area. But essentially, you need to go to that particular link, and you will see for your province, you can download your province and see what the grading scale is for your province. All the provinces are different across Canada. So, so just know that, like, in Ontario, 80 to 100 is an A, but in BC, it's 85 to 100. So it can be different depending on it. So somebody's asking if there's a calculator to convert the GPA. So you have to do that yourself. Hold on one moment. I'm going to close my door here. All right. So, basically, you need to use your scale as well as the NCAA, core courses to create a GPA using your grading scale and also your crediting equivalencies. So in the handout section, I'm also going to add right now, essentially it's a GPA worksheet. So I use this to basically do the math for you. You need to make sure that you're filling it out properly in order for it to work. But you need to use this particular document. Okay, I just added it into the handouts area and I shared it. So you can use that Excel document and your provincial grading document to create your GPA. You'll of course need a transcript so that you can refer to your courses. If you need help with this, I am happy to help. I like doing this. I think it's fun. In the provincial guidelines, you'll also see a list of the approved core courses. Not every class that's in English or math or science or social science or language class, they don't all just automatically count as core courses. They are a narrowed down list that's been approved by the NCAA. So it is really important to cross-reference that. You also will see the timeline and graduation guidelines there. Okay, we have a couple of questions. What does it mean when a player has a GPA above 4.0? So you actually can't have a GPA above 4.0 in the NCAA GPA because they don't weight the GPAs. So the highest grade average you can have is a 4.0. And just know that this is being recorded, so everyone will get a recording afterwards, and you'll be able to go back and see any of this information after we're done. The 4 additional courses could be additional math science courses. Yes, they can. So the additional courses can be English, math, science, social science, second language, and in some cases, religion and philosophy classes. So any of the core courses plus some additional courses on top of that are eligible for the last category. A weighted GPA is when you've taken like an AP class. So if your school has AP or IB classes, AP is advanced placement, IB is international baccalaureate. So in an academic GPA, sometimes weight is given to those courses because they're harder. So let's say you got a 70% in a AP calculus class. A weighted GPA would bump that grade up to an 80. Let's say you got an 85 in that class, or no, let's say you got a 95 in that class. A weighted GPA would essentially put it over 100. And so when you watch a TV show in the US and you hear someone say, I've got a 4.3 GPA, essentially what they're saying is that's their weighted GPA, and it includes something like an AP class. The NCAA doesn't care about AP or IB classes, and they don't weight your grades. If you got a 70% in that AP class, the NCAA is going to treat it as a 70%. So again, the highest GPA available is a 4.0. So someone's asking if a law course counts. Usually it does. Usually it counts under social sciences, but it depends on what province you're in. And you need to look at the specific provincial guidelines to see if the law class in your province counts. I know that in Ontario, for example, the international law class 4U class does count as a social science course. Okay, so just to clarify that weighted grade, we're not talking about weighted grades right now at all because NCAA doesn't use weighted grades, and we're only talking about GPA in the context of NCAA eligibility on this slide. And so I'm going to give you the link to those provincial guidelines. So just give me one moment because, of course, like I said, I put it there in the chat, but I did not I did not take a moment to copy and paste. There it is. Okay. So here it is in the chat. So let's talk a little bit about timeline. Some people are asking questions more related to admissions, so I am going to wait a moment because I do have a slide where we talk about that. So we're going to wrap up with NCAA eligibility before we talk about admissions to the university itself. As far as eligibility is concerned, you must graduate on time. Typically on time means 4 years of high school, grade 9 through 12, but essentially you need to adhere to your provincial timeline, which is outlined in the link that I provided on your provincial PDF. So for example, if you live in Quebec, you need to graduate high school by grade 11. And if you do enroll in CEGEP, you need to adhere to the length of your program and graduate on time. So if you're in a 2-year program, graduate in 2 years. If you're in a 3-year program, graduate in 3 years. You must complete 15 of 16 of your core courses within those 4 years of high school. And you may complete one additional course after you graduate. Now you can, let's say you graduate from high school and decide to do a postgraduate year or a grade 13. That's fine. You can take a full load of courses in that grade 13 year, but just know that only one of those will be used towards your NCAA GPA. Now, the university you go to is, of course, going to look at all your classes. So you still want to do well in those courses. But as far as your GPA is concerned, for eligibility, only one extra class would be taken after that time. You are allowed a delayed enrollment period, and it's different for each sport. The most common delayed enrollment period is 12 months, or essentially 1 year, but there are some exceptions to that. Men's ice hockey and men's and women's D1 skiing both have a delayed enrollment period until your 21st birthday. So it is common for men's ice hockey players and skiers to often take 1, 2, or maybe up to even 3 years off of their university studies in order to become more attractive as a recruit for Division I. In men's and women's tennis, the delayed enrollment period is only 6 months, which is kind of funky. But basically, just be aware of that if you are a tennis player. After once you enroll at a post-secondary institution, whether that's in the US playing sports or if it's in Canada not playing in sports, it doesn't matter. Whenever you enroll in post-secondary, your clock will begin and you will have 5 years to compete in 4 seasons. The reason you have 5 years to compete in 4 seasons is it does give you the wiggle room to take a redshirt year if you need it. For highly competitive sports, redshirting in the first year is common. Let's say if you've watched, I'm going to bring it back to March Madness. If you watch a March Madness tournament, or perhaps you recently watched the bowl games that happened for football, you might see it'll mention what year each athlete is. In the US, they use the terms freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And if you see red shirt freshman, it means that the athlete didn't play their first year that they were enrolled in the university. They practiced with the team, were part of the team, but didn't compete. And then they began their competition during their second year or their sophomore year. And that means they're a red shirt freshman because it's their first year of playing on that team. So that's what that means. You can also use a red shirt if you have an injury. So some athletes have to do that, unfortunately, but it means that you don't necessarily lose a season of play if you want to keep going. We're going to move into just a few recruitment tips before we talk about admissions, and then I'll address the questions that are piling up. So a few quick tips. As far as academics are concerned, as a reminder, grade through 12 is considered by both the NCAA and US admissions officers. Maintaining a high GPA is beneficial to you with recruitment, and it can help with merit scholarships. If you can get merit scholarships, that helps you because not all scholarships are full scholarships. Some universities might offer you partial scholarships for athletics. So if you're able to get a merit scholarship as well, that might help you essentially end up with a full scholarship between the two. Also, if you're able to secure a lot of merit scholarship, It's attractive for the coach because they might have more sports scholarship to spread around to other athletes. So no matter what, having high grades is going to be beneficial to you in this process. I recommend considering to take an SAT or ACT, and this is why. More than a lot of the US universities are now test optional in their admissions process. However, about a third of them still require an SAT or ACT exam for either admissions or for scholarship consideration. You don't know as an athlete where you might be recruited, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you get recruited to a university and find out that you have to quickly take an SAT exam. The other thing is coaches are used to using these tests as a recruitment tool. And so if you take an exam in grade 11 and you start reaching out to coaches and you can give them that SAT score or ACT score, then that lets them know that you're on track academically for them to be able to recruit you. And it's a tool that they've used in the past to know if you're hitting the benchmarks. So it is it's a great thing to consider doing and something to consider doing early to really help you throughout the process. If in the end the university doesn't need it, then it's fine. It's a trial by fire. It's something that you got to do. But if in the end the university requires it, then you're not stuck in a bind. On the athletic side, as you're getting started, some things to consider. Each university on their athletic website typically has a recruitment questionnaire. So if you're interested about in a school, I recommend going to their website and filling that out just to learn a little more about their recruitment process. Take advantage of travel and high visibility tournaments, especially ones that do go down to the United States if you have the opportunity. Create highlight videos for online profiles. Everybody has a different way that they like to do that. But I do recommend something like a YouTube or Instagram channel, somewhere where you can include videos and updates on your highlights. And then, if you're a highly sought after athlete, coaches might reach out to you. But for many athletes, you're the one who's going to need to start that process. Feel free to reach out to coaches at any school that you're interested in. Start with that recruitment questionnaire. And then if nothing comes of it, do feel free to send a follow-up email with a little more information about yourself, maybe a link to that highlight video. The last piece of advice there is don't just send that to one or two coaches. You've got to cast a really wide net. Every coach recruits differently, might have a need for an athlete like you or not, depending on, if you're in a team sport, maybe the position you have, they're full and they don't need any more baseball pitchers or soccer goalies, whatever it is. So you do need to cast a wide net because, your dream school just might simply not be open to recruiting you. So get started on that. You can start that as early as grade 10 or grade 11. And that's really kind of the typical timeline of when coaches start thinking about their athletes for upcoming seasons. Now, that's just the sports side of things, right? Everything we just talked about was about eligibility, recruitment on the athletic side. You also need to actually apply to the university that you'll be going to. Now, as a recruited athlete, if you're in D1, D2, and you are getting a scholarship, then likely the coach will be giving that information to admissions. And when you apply, it's a little more of a formality. However, if you're looking at Division III or becoming a walk-on athlete or any instance where it's going to be a little more competitive, that application process can be quite important. So you will need to complete an application and pay a fee. Fees range school to school on what that is. Application deadlines vary a lot in the United States. They're typically anywhere between October and March. But if you're an athlete, let's take an example like basketball. Basketball is a winter sport. The season ends around March-ish, February, March. If you have a great run at a championship and you start having conversations with coaches as late as March for the upcoming fall and you've missed a deadline, as a recruited athlete, the coach, might be able to help you bypass missing that deadline. So just know that when scholarships are on the line, that the deadlines can be skirted if needed. But for the most part, you do want to meet deadlines, especially if you've been recruited early in the process. Besides completing an application, your guidance counselor will send and upload transcripts. You need to submit official SAT or ACT scores if they are required by the university you will be going to, and submit other supplements as required by the university. This might include essays, letters of recommendation, or other things like an interview. Now we have a lot of questions that are coming through, so I'm going to take a big sip of water and we are going to dive into them. While I do that, you can go ahead and take a look at our information on how to get a hold of me again. Okay. Would universities rather see sports through high school teams or city teams? Now, in Canada, it's been my experience that that club and city teams tend to be more competitive than high school teams, but that depends on what kind of high school you're at. If you're at a high school with a high performance athletic program, then the high school team is maybe better than the city team. I think the most important thing is that your level of play. So if you're playing for a high school that is dominant in the sport and has had players recruited down to the US before, then that's the team to be on. But if your high school team is more recreational and the city teams are the ones that are competitive in travel, then that's the team you need to be on. So it's more about level of competitiveness and reaching for the highest level possible for you in your sport. Is it beneficial to get a recruitment agent for colleges? That's a personal decision, so I'm not going to weigh in on whether or not you should do that. What I will say is that it's not required to do. You can yourself reach out to universities, talk to coaches, and initiate scholarship conversations. That is all things that you can do on your own. If you do decide to go with a recruitment agency, then they are supporting you and helping you with that process. So always just important to know that recruitment agencies are not required for the process. They can be useful if you need a little help along the way. How will coaches notice Canadian athletes? So there's different ways to do that. So like I mentioned, starting by filling out the recruitment questionnaires, finding out more about the recruitment processes at various schools. Some of them will have showcases. So going down to the States to showcase tournaments at US universities, especially if they're specifically for recruiting, is a really good idea. If you can't travel at all, then if you're just playing in Canada, playing at the highest level possible, taking video, and creating highlight reels, and then sending out those videos to a wide swath of coaches. Also working with your coaches to talk to coaches they know in their network. If you're playing for a team who's never had anyone go down to the US before, that is going to make things a little more challenging. Also a little less likely to go D1 if that's your case. I would say if you're looking at D1, make sure to try to get onto teams in your area where you've seen success with people going to D1 before. Doesn't mean it's not impossible if there's no track record, but that would be something to consider to give yourself the best options. For skiing, if you're turning 21 in April 2024, you should have started school in August 2023, or can you start in August 2024? I'll go back to the timeline slide. Up to the 21st birthday. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that right off the top. I think you've just got to refer to the College Bound Student Athlete Guide to get the exact cutoff date. I'm not sure what it is without looking at the guide. Could you redshirt yeah. So someone's asking about redshirt years. So yeah, you can redshirt at any time during your 5 years to complete 4 seasons. It doesn't have to be a health reason. Let's see. All right, I think I got all of those. And then heading into the Q&A area, how do Canadians take the SAT? So the website for the SAT is the collegeboard.org. You can go to that website and create an account. And from there, you will be able to see which testing centers are near you. You can also check out the ACT. These tests are really similar. They both test reading, English, grammar, and math. And so the biggest difference is the ACT has a science section. There are some areas like Saskatchewan in particular it feels like more more ACT centers than SAT centers. Whereas in Eastern Canada, basically Ottawa and Pass, there's only like one or two ACT centers. SAT is much more common. So, depending on where you live, you might find that one test is more convenient to access than the other. Let's see. When you discuss graduating on time, what about the students that are taking a fifth year? If a student takes a fifth year, that's considered their grace period or delayed enrollment year. So that is allowed, but that's essentially that fifth year or post-grad year or prep school year, that's considered that like delayed enrollment year. Will participating in a CHL training camp affect eligibility? Yes, it possibly can. So you do need to look at the training camp rules. They are very, very specific. There is a 48-hour rule. An athlete can participate for 48 hours, but then after that point, if they're still being hosted, then that like tips into the professional area. So I highly recommend, as a hockey player, if you are considering a training camp or tryouts with a CHL team, you do need to look very closely at the amateurism rules so that if you want to keep NCAA open, you are not kind of going past the limitations there. And just again to mention about the amateurism slide, like I said, when you're being reviewed for amateurism, just because they're looking at your involvement of recruiting service, it doesn't mean that doesn't make you an amateur athlete. Essentially, they're reviewing that to make sure that you didn't hire an agent that is trying to make you money in the sport. So they're just going to review anything that might be connected with becoming a professional athlete. So typically recruitment services are fine. What would not be fine is if that person was actually an agent. Okay. Can you find out how many scholarships are available at each school? So you can know how much a certain sport has. So you can find out that, like you gave the example, men's lacrosse has 12.6 scholarships at D1. That's the maximum number, but there's no website that tells you how many each school and coach has. That has to be done through recruitment itself and just asking coaches questions. Unfortunately, there's no resource that can narrow that down. What kind of videos do coaches look for in individual sports? So, I'm sure you could probably guess based on your sport, is particularly something like gymnastics. I mean, gymnastics as an implement doesn't move around much. So a full video of your performance would make a lot of sense in a sport like gymnastics. But if you're on a team sport, there's really two videos that they're looking for, which is a highlights reel as well as full game tape, because a coach would really like to see how you're playing when you're not the star as well. So say in basketball, a highlight reel might have a lot of you shooting or stealing or rebounding, but in a full game tape, they're going to see, well, what is your position like when you're not the star of the show? Did you make a lot of passes to support other players. So maybe they're looking more at that, like assists, screens, etc. So just note that that full game tape is also really important, especially if it's at a game that was really important. It's one thing to look like a star against the worst team in the whole league. It's a whole other if it was, say, a championship game. Okay, looks like people are posting more questions in the chat. So when it comes to the SAT and the ACT, you only need to take one or the other. It doesn't really matter which one you take. So up to you, and you definitely don't need to take both. That would be kind of a waste of time. Now, if you took an SAT and you didn't like it and you kind of bombed it and you feel like, oh, maybe the ACT might be better for me, I'll give that a try, go for it. That's nice to have a second option, but you're never required to take both. Do you have to be a certain age for coaches to reach out to you? Yes. It's actually not based on age. It's based on your enrollment at school. So for most sports, coaches can begin reaching out to athletes in June of their grade 10 year. In the United States, that's usually after they've kind of finished their grade 10. But in Canada, I would say it's usually when students are still just finishing up their grade 10. There's some sports where it's a little early. I think is it basketball? I can't remember, but there's some sports where they can reach out as early as January of the grade 10 year. Each sport has a different timeline. So it's important to look into what the timeline is for coach connection, as well as when they have dead periods and quiet periods. So essentially a dead or quiet period is when a coach is not going to respond. If you send them emails, they're not going to respond back. Usually dead periods are related to their tournament cycles. So like they'll have a dead period throughout their playoffs and that span of time, so that they're focused on playoffs and not connecting with recruits. So just look up your recruitment calendar for your sport to know when those periods are. Okay. Is it possible to play more than one sport? So it depends. If you play like for a D3 school, then you could be a multi-sport athlete. It really just depends on the level of play at the university. It's incredibly rare to be allowed to play more than one Division I sport, and even it would be incredibly, you would have to be like Deion Sanders to get a scholarship for both sports. And I don't know if you all know who Deion Sanders is, but it's pretty rare to be a multi-sport athlete playing at a level high enough to be so desired to potentially get scholarship money for both sports. I don't even know if that's possible. It would be that rare. So if you are interested in more than one sport, you have to speak to the school to see if it's possible. And it really depends on what sports you play. So, some sports, even if they are considered in one season, might practice throughout the entire year, leading up to the season. So it might, even though the competition is 3 months long, you might have, let's say it's a spring sport, you might have a fall competition schedule that your team plays with too. There's some really, really specific questions coming through about the classes people are taking. I would highly recommend just emailing me if you have a question like that. It's really too hard to answer those here, particularly when I don't even know what province you live in. So I would say send me an email with more details if you want to get deeper into your course selection and your grade point average. The best time to take the SATs is in grade 11. The level of math goes up to functions, and that's really typically covered in grade 11. So I would say that's a great time to take it, particularly if you want to be recruited as an athlete. It's better to take it earlier, just because recruitment starts in grade 11 typically. Depends on the sport. I mean, if you're taking a gap year, you might start recruitment in grade 12. If that's the case, then go ahead and wait till grade 12. So it's kind of a personal question based on your timeline. What would you need to put in your highlight video if you're interested in track and field? A video of you doing your event. So obviously competition video, and then I don't know if you're a runner, maybe some of you doing drills or something like that, but mostly they want to see competition and technique. Oh, there we go. Someone knows who Deion Sanders is. Fabulous. When making a highlight reel, can the clips played range between the grades of 9 to 12? Sure. That is fine, but I would say it's pretty important to have recent clips. You might want to create more than one highlight video. And you don't want your highlights to be too heavily of you 3 years ago, right? The coach wants to know who you are more recently and not long ago. When should I contact coaches? As early as grades 9 or 10, depending on your sport, depending on where you are with your competition, depending on how elite you are in your sport. Definitely grade 11 if you want to enroll right after you finish grade 12. Grade 11 is the timeline where most coaches are going to be looking at you so that they can make you an offer by fall of grade 12. So if you are a grade 12 athlete and you're looking at options for next fall, I would say scholarship wise, you're not going to find much at this time. It's not impossible, but it's not super likely. You might consider a delayed enrollment year to increase your looks. And you can always reach out to coaches and tell them, hey, I'm interested in 2024 or 2025 if you are open to taking a gap year. All right, this is the last question I'm going to answer, and then we're going to wrap up for today. And please send me an email. You've got my email address there. If your question didn't get answered, then feel free to follow up, and I'm happy to keep the conversation going. If you took the SAT and fall within an acceptable range for the SAT in grade 11 year, would you recommend taking it again to score higher? If you're happy with an SAT score, then there's no reason to take it again. So up to you on if you want to increase an SAT score. So if you have a more specific example, feel free to email it to me. But based on your question, it sounds like if you take it once and it's a good score, then you don't need to take it again. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your participation today. We had such a great group here, lots of awesome questions. Stay in touch. Like I said, I'm happy to help you create an NCAA GPA, talk to you more about your own personal recruitment. And as an Education USA advisor, the main thing we work on really is admissions and best fit. So if you need help finding good fit universities that have your major and also your sport, need more understanding of how to reach out to coaches, maybe what a letter to a coach should look like, those are some of the places where I can really help you out on your athletic and academic journey. Good luck to all of you. Have a nice evening and good luck in your sports. Good night, everyone.